country whose parents have struggled to educate them, and education is their status, it's their rank. How can they bring themselves easily back down to the level of a farmer, which is the destiny which they escaped from? You know? It seems so complicated to me sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, however, don't forget that I also was the first to have a university degree in my family. So I mean, I could have suffered the same syndrome, and I've never discovered this dimension until I started this work. I mean, I must have told you several times that I never talked to a farmer until a little bit more than 15 years ago, and what irritates me is besides this aspect of the relationship with people, which I've developed once I've concluded on purely scientific basis, that was a large waste of time to continue to do research in an environment which doesn't represent the target environment, and therefore it was terribly important. It was absolutely vital to start doing decentralized breeding. At the moment we start thinking about decentralized breeding, we obviously were confronted with a great number of different target environments. And then the obvious thing which came to my mind is, said, hey, but in this place there are people, and these people have been there for, in some cases, thousands of years. What about if we start discussing with them the possibility that we enter in a sort of partnership? And that's basically the reason why, for the first time, I get out of my office. I went in a farmer field. I sat with a group of 10, 15 farmers. I still have a slide, so if I find the slide, I can count how many. But I know exactly the spot in which this is what happened, because I remember that I had the stick on me. I was sitting on a chair. I had the stick in my hand. We were in a place with a lot of dust, and I start drawing. What I did today on the board, I start drawing what could be the possible first PPB trial on the dust with the plots and so on. I start asking the farmers about dimension, size, number of varieties, and so on. And but already at that time it was a very colloquial sort of interaction. It was not I'm coming here to solve your problems if you do that, and make sure that you don't miss anything of what I'm telling you to do. And but it was a try to find together how these things would be organized. And this was the beginning of a relationship which in 15 years has changed many methodological aspects, all suggested by farmers, because they felt that that their opinion, and this is another touching story, when farmers were telling me, I said, but you know what is new in our relationship with you is that you're listening to, and you're listening to our opinion, that we have the feeling, you make us having the feeling that our opinion is important to you. And this is actually important, because I changed the way in which I was doing things based on their recommendation, that I found to be very, very sensible. Now, the problem, that's something that I've discussed with a social scientist once, and I was very much surprised when she told me that actually, at least probably some aspects of this attitude towards the people who surrounds you, regardless whether they're farmers or colleagues or so on, can actually be taught. So it's something in which people can be trained. Now, don't ask me how, because our conversation stopped at that point, but that's something that perhaps is worth examining. What I thought it might be, it could be sufficient, and it wasn't, is to bring people with me, and not pretending to be a teacher. I said, well, look, in my case, the way in which I interact with farmers, I make jokes, I make them laugh, I try to make this meeting as lively as possible. So something that, when you're thinking back, I said, well, I spent a nice hour. I mean, it was something interesting. I've not wasted my time. And But the result was, in some cases, that my Syrian colleagues told me, said, "But Dr. Ceccarelli, you are telling jokes to farmers." I said, "Well, what's wrong with that? I'm telling jokes to my friend, they are my friend, so I don't see any reason why I should not tell jokes." And you can see quite a lot of things behind that observation. I said that somehow you are on that pedestal, and part of this is that you should always say serious things, you should never laugh, and I mean, but this is a syndrome. I mean, if one of my children will behave like this, I will take it to a psychologist because it's a serious problem.
Have you seen any impressive cases of other scientists who started in a more closed way, in a more top-down way, and were able to get out of this shell and establish more equal relationships?
Well, I have a fantastic experience in Yemen with a guy by the name Ahmed Luft, which is, again, is one of the things that I was never able to do. He's a guy who highly deserved to go for a PhD, and I never find. I was never able to find a way to send him to a degree training anywhere. But when I met Ahmed for the first time, together with a group of Yemeni farmers on the terraces in a village at 3,000 meters elevation, and I saw him dealing with farmers, my first impression was that Ahmed has got participation in his blood. I mean, he just did everything right. And that's, again, a case in which, you know, my influence was zero. Then, of course, because he did not get any support, because again he was doing something a little bit unconventional, we became very close friends, also with his family, because I was an international scientist, and this, of course, helped him in getting respect within his institution. In fact, now he's a highly respected scientist, but yet all his colleagues are getting a PhD, and he's the only one who doesn't have the title of doctor. And yet he's probably the most capable. In fact, he's Director General. He's always putting him in different responsibilities. Whenever there is a problem in the institute, he just changes his job to fix the problem. At this moment, he's the head of the gene bank.
But, so this is a case of someone who had it naturally in his blood. I was wondering about people who didn't seem to be so natural, but somehow they were able to evolve. I'm
thinking about probably people in Eritrea, but again, people in Eritrea do not have a past of conventional scientists, because Eritrea is a relatively young country, became independent in 1991. And we started PPB in 1998 before they could have any research program. Well, I have colleagues in Jordan who have considerably improved, but they still occasionally have the tendency to speak too much. I mean, that's also something that should be avoided. I mean, even if you have to tell something which requires some time, my impression is that, particularly with farmers, is always good to break it into pieces, rather to make a speech of 15 minutes, just to break it in small things that you spread through the conversation, because this maintains the conversation on more equal level, that everybody is roughly have the possibility of talking about the same time. Again, in this country we have an example of a scientist who I think probably means well, but still is keeping too much time as I don't know whether he just wants to make sure that people understand who he is at the end of the day.
And what effect do you think this has on farmers when they hear you speaking for a long time? What does that mean to them?
Well, they may not be. One has to always to keep in mind that if you observe their conversation, they are always a multitude of voices. There is never somebody who is actually drawing all the attention. And if there is a guy making a speech and the other listening, this guy immediately goes to a different level. So it's important to maintain, to always give the impression. I'm very much against, for example, and they always do it to me when I go to Algeria, to a meeting with farmers. The farmers are sitting on a chair, and then there is a desk, and I have to sit behind the desk. And I've told them, said, I don't want that. I don't want the chair to be arranged in a circle, and I sit in a circle together with them. You know, there is always this attitude that should be, you are on this side, the other on this side, on the other side. Never this attitude of making. I mean, the differences are still there. I mean, I will say things that farmers cannot say, and the farmers will say things that I cannot say. But this doesn't have to be physically represented in the way you arrange a room or an office or whatever.
Sometimes do you get the impression, because sometimes I get the impression, that farmers expect you to play the role of the big scientist, and they want you to play. They're somehow more comfortable. They look to you. Even those scientists who give the big speeches, I sometimes feel like I get more annoyed than the farmers. Sometimes I feel as if the farmers like the speech, no? They feel as if they're important because somebody important has come to give them a big speech.
Well, I think, but this is due to the fact that they have been sort of, they got accustomed that this is the natural relationship between scientists and farmers, so that they may found a bit strange by what I'm doing, by avoiding giving speeches. But my experience is, in the long term, this pays off in terms of being able, for example, of being told, my dear doctor, I think that what you did is wrong. Now, to be able to get to that point in the Arab context, with all the cultural component of, of respect for foreigners. I mean, I'm a foreigner. I'm a former university professor. I'm a scientist coming from an international organization, and I tell you that you're wrong. And it took me many, many years. But I've reached the stage in which the farmer told me, said, I told you 2 years ago that if you involve the people from the ministry, we will get nowhere, and now it's happening. And I said, yes, and I apologize. The apologies are not sufficient because we have been wasting 2 years of our time. Now, and I was very happy because then I knew that I was one of them, because he will never tell these sort of things to any of my colleagues or to the Syrian scientists.
And you think that you get better science and better results if they feel as if you are one of them and you feel as if you are one of them?
Of course, because they can notice, first of all, they live with the trials. They see the trials almost every day, I don't. And they, at the end, when they have to take decisions, their decisions are based on all this cumulative experience, the fact that they've been living with a crop for 5-6 months. So they know many more things than anybody else. And they wouldn't do it if they consider this is my experiment. They can do this only if they consider that this is actually. Well, I will give you another example, which goes with the methodological changes that we did over time. When one farmer, at the end of a meeting, told me, I said, well, there is something else before we close the meeting that I want to tell you. And it's something that was in my mind for some time, but now I think I got clear ideas. I'm not very happy on the way in which the selection day, which is one of the most important things, is organized, because we have several trials. We are big groups. There are organizational issues, and I found that we have to rush because at the end of the day you have to go back to Aleppo. And I believe that I'm not able to spend enough time in front of each plot to give a good score. I need more time. So what I'm suggesting is that you bring the forms, the scoring forms, well in advance, and then I go myself when I have time. And then I ask him, I said, well, I think that this is a good suggestion, but what the other people think about, and everybody agree with him. And then eventually I asked him, I said, do you mind if I bring this idea also to the other villages and see what people think? And everybody agreed with him. So that's something which increase the flexibility. We get much more participation because as it happened the other day, you fix a day and then you go, and then something happened in the village, some people cannot come, and this is the only opportunity that they have. There is not a second opportunity. While you know, if they have the forms in their house, they can go to the field and do the scoring at any time. And in that particular case, actually, we did a small experiment because he did the selection twice by himself with a group, and then we make a quick calculation, and the relationship between his score and the actual yield was much closer when he did the selection by himself. So he actually proved his point scientifically. We were able to prove his point scientifically. So there is this I believe that at the end, building up a relationship between equals who still contribute in different way to the program is highly beneficial, because it makes the farmer feel that if they have something positive or negative to tell, they are free to tell it. I mean, they are not limited in any way to their contribution, be the contribution positive or negative.
In your experience, and this is the last question, in your experience, how can farmers become motivated to get involved in research? Do you find that they're already, as soon as you go into a new village, they're already interested and they see themselves as researchers? Or if they don't, how does this feeling build over time?
Well, it's very much related to what we've been discussing so far. Once you organize the trial, it's very important that during the organization of the trial they are as much involved as possible. I think the ideal was we did the other day in that meeting, that anything we went there giving them the impression, which was honest, that this was a proposal, and they were free to reject it. And it takes time, but in some cases this process was much faster than in other cases, because very, very quickly the farmers start asking to have the same sort of experiments for other crops, which were then were even more important. The scientific contributions, the quality of the scientific contribution that they can give to the program obviously increases with time. And this depends very much on the starting point. In Syria we started with a situation in which farmers did not even know that there could be different types of barley. When I told them that the idea was to show them 200 different types of barley, they could not even understand the Arabic translation, because they thought there was something wrong. I mean, there is one type of barley, why these guys are talking about 200 types? And when they saw them in the field, it was one of the biggest events in their life. I mean, they were shouting to each other, "Come here, look at this one, how funny it is," and so on. So I mean, it was something that they were like children, and there was an enthusiasm. Now, Ahmed, the very same person that I mentioned before, the very first meeting took place in his house, and he was one of those saying, "What do you mean by 200? There is only one type of barley." 15 years later, he is able to touch a spike of barley and tell that probably one of the parents is the wild barley. And I didn't make a speech, I didn't make a lecture. It was simply going to the field together, and he asking me, I said, can you tell me where this plot is coming from, which type of cross? And I was reading the cross without adding too much. And then he was building up all this information, and he was noticing that all the tallest plots were almost always crosses with the spontaneum. He also understood that the spontaneum, being a wild plant, shattered the seed, that he has very rough horns. And all this was, you know, you cannot make a lecture. I mean, you have to follow the same dynamics of the process of learning of farmers, which is living with their crop. So today they get that piece of information, tomorrow they will get this, and so on. And all this builds up. But the difference between a farmer and the student is that the farmers never forget anything. He's absorbing everything like a sponge, and then, wham, at the right moment, everything will come out. And then, of course, if I take a visitor now to that village, the visitor will turn his back and say, oh, come on, you are working with very atypical farmers, because he did not know Ahmed 15 years before.
And do you think it's what motivates them to get interested in research? Is it simply the fact that year after year they see that the yields are going up, so they make an economic benefit and so they're interested, or is it something else? It's
not only that. If you ask them what they like most in this process, they start mentioning we like very much this continuous interaction with the scientist, but we are learning a lot of new things. Yield and money never come fast. I mean, it's the process itself. And that's why it's very important to build up this feeling that these are their trials, that there is so much input in what's happening in the field from their side as from the scientist side, so that they see their ideas being realized. So it's becoming like playing with something new. It's a nice toy, and then it produces a variety is good, but you know, the fact that today they select something, they know that I'm using this in crosses, and then in 4 or 5 years there will be the progenies of those coming back, they keep remembering. It gives them something that they never had before, the possibility. And then, of course, there is the component of getting a better variety. In fact, in Syria, where we started a fest, there are varieties flowing out of these trials, the major problem being to keep track of them, because the farmers will rediscover their natural attitude of experimenting, which is part of the farmer's culture, which in some cases, fortunately much less in developing than in developed countries, has been lost. In one of the objections that I heard more frequently when I talk about what I'm doing when I'm in Europe is that probably with European farmers is much more difficult, because they have lost all their traditional knowledge and this pleasure of experimenting, which is evident, is obvious in Garmsar, but example like Garmsar happened before in other places, that farmers start experimenting on their own as a parallel activity. So you are generating a pleasure of trying to find solutions on their own, using perhaps your own material, which is in the trial, but then try new things, and this I think is a major contribution. It's much more important than a novel variety, because it's really putting back research in their hands.
So you really do believe that this natural pleasure of experimentation, it's a natural state. It's something
which is there deep down. So in some cases it comes out. For example, Ahmed was already there when I met him, because he was telling me one day, the very early days, he took me for a ride, and he was telling me, I said, you can tell from far away who was the Ahmed's friends. And I asked him, how? Are all those having trees around the house? because he was telling the farmers that it's important to have trees because they create a microenvironment, and to have flowers to create. They are basically in an environment like this. It's all very dry, it never rains and so on. So he had this natural attitude of doing something different from the others. And when he discovered also this dimension, of course he was very conducive because he was a teacher in the local school, so he was also respected as somebody who has always good ideas. And then there was another teacher who also joined hands, and then a group of other farmers, many actually big farmers, who started following through. Of course, within each farmer community, you find big differences, like you find between scientists. Farmers who are always the first one to have a new idea, are those that I call the prima donna. But as long as you keep these in the context, so they do to the other farmers what I do. They throw a new idea, and then this is open to discussion. But inevitably, in that community, this guy is automatically recognized as one who, more often than the others, contributes with new ideas. And all these sometimes there, it only needs this little push, which in the case of plant breeding is very simple to organize, to have this display of differences, and simply looking at the differences, you start generating idea of what you can do with that kind of barley that you never thought before.
Very good. Excellent. Thank you.
Welcome.